what's your fondest memory of Andy?
Oh, that's a good question. I think just being with Andy was always great. I'll tell you, when we went to Texas, we went to Houston for the Urban Cowboy opening, and we met there. And I think I had the most fun of any times I was with Andy. He was right on. He was gossipy and bitchy and talked about everybody. At the dinner parties, we went from one big dinner party to one big club. From one cowboy, loved the cowboys. He thought they were all so handsome. And we were at dinner at Lynn Wyatt's one night, and John Travolta wanted to come, but he wanted to bring a big entourage with him, and Lynn wouldn't let him. So when John came in, and he said, "Look at him. Look how cute he is. Look at his blue eyes. Look how great he is." And then he said, we went to sit. John didn't stay for dinner, but Jim Bridges, who had directed, was a very good friend of mine and a wonderful person, and also of Andy's. So Jim stayed for dinner, and he said, "Andy, we'll get you together with John tomorrow so you can be with him on your own and talk to him." But it was a very she party, and it was great to see all these wonderful Texas women, and women who had come in from Europe, too. Lynn had invited people in from Europe to be there in the presence of Andy Warhol, rather than, when you say, with kings and queens. By that time, he was really well thought of. So to be anywhere, so many of those kind of parties. I mean, going to Marissa Berenson's wedding and going as his date was like exceptional. We knew everything that was going on because everyone came to Andy and admitted and whispered and told him their secrets. So we knew that the bridegroom wasn't getting ready, he was drinking, that all the bridesmaids were crying. I mean, it was like all this drama going on everywhere, and he was just sitting there listening to people running in and out, telling him everything. There were a lot of wonderful times like that. I probably could go on, maybe even just being in an art gallery with him and his presence.
What was his relationship like with your daughters?
He was fabulous with the girls. The girls always used to say, "I don't know why Mom's friends are so nice to us, but Andy is always nice to us." When they were about 10 years old, they interviewed him with a tape recorder. They pulled a switch on him, and they took that tape recorder and that interview to school, and they had photographs, and they wrote a little paper about it, which was a wonderful thing. People couldn't believe that the teachers couldn't believe that they actually knew Andy Warhol, and they'd come up with this. But one time we were at the factory for lunch, and Andy was making one of those appearances where he had to be there. He didn't want to talk to any of the people. And the girls, I have twin daughters, and my daughters went to say hello to him, and he made them sit beside him. And he talked and talked and talked. And they came afterwards and said, "Mom, your friends are so nice, especially Andy. He's really great." He was good. He liked children. I said, "Why do you think that?" And they said, "He just likes children. He's really nice to children."
And he must have been sincere with them, because kids can see.
Oh, I think you're right. I think that maybe it was a level where he could be himself. It was a level where he could be real, as well as the children responding to him, not as any celebrity or anything, or bowing to him, or trying to win his favor. They were just kids talking to another kid.
How would you describe Andy in 25 words?
Andy was a totally complex person. He was generous with the people he wanted to be generous with. He was tight and cheap with other people. He was giving with some people. He was not giving. He was absolutely, always felt you never gave him enough. You could never give him enough. He was very selfish. He was a very selfish person. Everything was about Andy. Everything was about Andy. He would make a painting, and he would have other people come in with the ideas. I mean, I was sitting there one day, and 3 people came in with different things that they thought should go on a canvas, or that should be the painting of the week, that kind of thing. And he would just take and take. I mean, you know, that was his quality. Some people can't take and filter things. He could take and filter things. And as I said, he was a sponge. He was a blotter. He would take as much in, and he would attribute it to himself. So in that respect, when I say selfish, everything was attributed to Andy Warhol. I mean, when he was supposed to do my portrait, he just couldn't make himself do the portrait. We had a deal, and he was going to do my portrait. I had done some things for him. And he just couldn't pay off. He just couldn't do it. He finally took the Polaroids, and he had them on his desk to actually do the piece. And I'm saying it may have been 3 or 4 years waiting. And he would say things like, well, are you mad at me? Are you still talking to me? Of course I am, Andy, but let's get down to it. You know, this is what it's got to be. So finally, he died. And he still hadn't done the portrait. And Rupert Smith, who was working with him at the time, knew that. And he called me and he said, I'm going to do your portrait because I know the photographs are there, I have the Polaroids, and I'll do them. So he did 2 pieces, beautiful pieces, may I add, very Andy Warhol. And he said, do you want me to sign Andy's name? And I said, no, how could you sign Andy's name? And he says, well, I've done it on so many other things. Why not do it on your portrait? And I said, no, Rupert, this is from your heart. I'd like you to sign it. So it came with Andy's Polaroids and Rupert's painting. So it does mean a lot to me.
What do you think Andy's biggest contribution was to 20th century art?
At the time, living through it, I quite frankly thought Andy was a lousy painter. I always thought Andy was a lousy painter. If you look around my collection, I have no Andy Warhols. I have things that Andy gave at Christmas time, maybe a scarf that he did, maybe those helium balloons, a couple of toy paintings that he had done one year. But I always thought Andy was not a good painter. The one thing that Andy did have that I thought was the idea of being ahead of time, where he would do a figure or dollar bills or anything that was creative. He pinpointed it at the time, but you didn't see it till time had passed. He was doing things presently that you didn't realize really meant something. I mean, he had a great respect for Jean-Michel Basquiat, who was also a good friend of mine. But he couldn't do anything like Jean-Michel. He couldn't work the way Jean-Michel did. And he would ask Jean-Michel, what's going on? How do you do it? I think now Andy's place, as we look back in history, I think he does have a really great place in that 20th century pop school. But at the time, and even now maybe I shouldn't go back on my word and say that his paintings are great. Maybe the subject matter, maybe what he did, maybe that 15 minutes of his time in that painterly period is what makes him what he is today.
Jean-Michel was 30 years younger than Andy, give or take. What was that?
I don't think Andy put an age limit on anything. Andy loved young people, just as we talked about being with my daughters. As far as we know, he could have been getting ideas from them. We don't know. I don't know. You know, you don't know how that influences people. He loved young artists, and he would take 1 or 2 of them, have 1 or 2 of them around with him. Photographers, it was their thing and our thing at Interview to find up-and-coming photographers who are now great photographers. He loved photography. He loved the work of photographers.
So it was Jean-Michel's youth?
I think Jean-Michel was a pretty bizarre character. He was a character. And it was something that Andy could identify with. There was real difference in Jean-Michel from, say, a Kenny Scharf or a Julian Schnabel or Keith Haring even. He was... You can pick that up?
Yeah, and it sounds louder. Yeah, on the mic. Okay.
I think it was that, I think he identified with a group of young artists who had something to offer, who were interesting, people that he could take with him to a dinner party. And you know, if he were going to a dinner party at wait, let me think what the name of that place is. He used to go all the time where it was in the Westbury. What was that place? That was one of the clubs. If he were invited to a very fancy dinner party at Mrs. Rockefeller's or at Agnes Gunn's or at some art collector's or some society woman, Brooke Astor's, he would like to take an entourage with him because he never felt comfortable enough to be with those people. So if he had these great young artists with him or he had some other kind of bizarre character with him, it would take the onus off of him for being a part of the group, having to integrate himself. People would come to him and look at what he had, and he would divert their attention to whoever he was with. He always had little tactics. He always had little things like that. But don't go too far. Don't take advantage of him, because he didn't like that at all. He wanted to be in control. He wanted to make sure that you were doing what he envisioned you as doing. Not the next day when you went back to Mrs. Astor's or Mrs. Rockefeller's or Miss Gunn's or to a popular restaurant and knew the maitre d'. Not that you went back there on your own and used Andy Warhol's name to get in. He didn't like that at all.
I interviewed Kenny Scharf because, of course, Keith is gone and Jean-Michel is gone. And it was interesting to hear his perspective of...
Did you talk to Kenny in
New York?
In New York?
He grew up in Florida.
Oh, that was nice. He's terrific. But he had those people who collaborated with him had a totally different view, I think, because Andy respected those artists in a different way. He didn't want, as I say, he loved artists. He wanted to be respected by artists, so he respected those artists the same way he would want them to respect him. I think. I don't know what Kenny said to you.
Oh, yeah, he was crushing. Yeah, totally. Called him the pop.
Well, because I think Andy helped the association with them, with the young artists, helped those artists to elevate themselves. Also, don't forget, Andy was at a level where he was... It was a pretty dormant period. When you start just doing portraits to make money and pay the bills, as he said, you're not doing anything that you can show in a gallery. You're not selling work. All you're doing is depending on a portrait commission. So in order to keep your work important, you've got to identify with and have this younger group of artists boosting you. So that was important for him.
What did you think of the Last Supper series?
The Last Supper series was kind of strange because I remember, I don't know if it was Ronnie and Rupert running around buying Last Suppers from all over New York, they said, buying replicas of the Last Supper, buying pictures of the Last Supper, and painting it, silk screening the Last Supper, and having this show in Europe. And they said that Andy had never even seen them till they started uncrating them and putting them up in the gallery. They thought that was a very strange kind of situation. And Rupert telling Andy, "Don't worry, they're good. They're good."
So he didn't even do that?
That's it. Well, the point is he must have decided what he wanted done, told them what to do, which I think is what he always did. And then they ran him off and shipped him, and they opened him up, and he said, don't worry, they're going to be great. So I thought that's pretty. I was going, Rupert, what? You were buying Last Suppers all over? Big ones, small ones, Last Suppers that glowed in the dark, Last Suppers in, you know, in those little shaky snows.
No.
Yes. Little snowing Last Suppers. So that was funny that you asked that, because I thought that was a interesting thing with Rupert when we were doing the sitting and talking about the portraits.
For his last great work, he has to be so totally hands-off.
I know. He had to sign them, so when they were undoing them, he was signing them. Where was it? Germany, I guess.
That was like Milan, in the church.
They started in Milan, then I think. Yeah, they.
I think they had them in the church that the original Last Supper is in, but it was being repaired.
Right.
So they put Andy's in there so that when the people came to see it.
Oh, they did that too. But I don't know if they had shipped them to Germany first for him, or if they'd shipped them wherever they shipped them. They were undoing them. I thought that was a good story.
That's a very good story. You know, Joan, I've asked you everything that I needed to ask.
Yay! Hooray!
I guess we're through. We're going to
Oh,
something
good.
that you can think of.
No, I think that's great. I hope you can use something.
Sure, okay.
I do. I really, I have had a lot of highlights in my life, and of course Andy Warhol is one of the highlights. Divine was another highlight in my life. I thought he was a wonderful person, and he spent a lot of time here. And many other artists and photographers, people that I've known in New York, basically New York people who are gone out of my life now. And they were the wonderful people who made the infrastructure of my life as it is today. And I miss them very much.